Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Ray Tampa Podcast. Our podcast offers bold commentary on various subject matters with a laser-like focus on the truth. My name is Ray Tampa, and I'm the host of the Ray Tampa Podcast. We have in our studio two talented and intelligent gentlemen, Mr. Russell Cato and Mr. Jamie Wilson III, my co-host. Also, we're honored and pleased to have one of the top former state senators in Florida, Mr. Jeff Brandes, as our guest. Mr. Brandes, welcome to the Ray Tampa Podcast.
Great to be with you. Thanks, Ray.
Excellent. No doubt, most Floridians are aware of the sad state of affairs that our state's insurance industry finds itself. Homeowners are seeing sickening price increases in their policy premiums. Homeowners and business owners are seeing horrible issues of insurance companies denying legitimate claims.
Yes.
And or underpaying claims or significantly delaying the payment of claims outside the timeframes required by law. Despite these horrific circumstances, the Florida legislature ended their 60-day session in March 2022 without addressing these issues. Our guest, former Senator Brandes, stood strong in his advocacy to get a special session of the legislature called to address all the cries of his constituents and others. For his success in getting the special session called, we applaud Senator Brandes. However, the question remains, did we solve the crisis? Mr. Brandes will help us with this question and a few other subject matter questions. So we'll begin by asking Mr. Brandes, please share with us where you were born and educated.
Sure. I was born in St. Petersburg, grew up here, went to Northside from kindergarten through 12th grade, where I graduated, played football and basketball, ran track there. 7 days after I graduated from high school, I left for the military. And went through basic training at Fort Knox and then went to college for a couple of years, got my commission at 19 years old. They spent 11 years in the military, spent 2003, 2004 in Iraq with 101st. Thought I was going to come back and work for my family business, which was Cox Lumber. And many people realize that it was a lumberyard located next to Gibbs High School there. And my family sold that business right before just as I had started working there. And that's what prompted me to run for the legislature. I was, I'm there in my mid-20s, late 20s or early 30s, and decided that, my path probably wasn't going to be in the business world. It was probably going to be doing something else. And so I decided to run for the Florida House and ran for the Florida House and won by just under 1,000 votes. I was a brand new, fresh face in the world of politics. Spent 2 years in the Florida House and then have just finished up a decade in the Florida Senate. Because of term limits, I had to leave office. And so I finished up last November, and then I started a nonprofit since then. So called the Florida Policy Project that kind of focuses on best practices. I think my big takeaway after 12 years in Tallahassee is everything in Tallahassee is tactical. There is no strategy. And so I couldn't tell you what the strategy is for housing affordability. I couldn't tell you what the strategy is for property insurance. I definitely couldn't tell you what the strategy is for criminal justice policy. And so, it's this challenge of governing the third largest state with 23 million people in population, another 150 million tourists every single year, without a long-term strategy. And this is, structural. It's part of the challenge is you have a Speaker of the House and a Senate President that change over every 2 years. It's like a CEO of a company. Every 2 years switches over, or a principal of a school every 2 years switches over. It's hard to have cohesive policy within that school or that business. And that's kind of where Florida finds itself. There is not a lot of cohesive long-term strategy that we're seeing play out. And the only area that I would say that we did have a cohesive strategy was education, where we always wanted universal school choice. We always wanted everybody able to be able to go to the school of their choice if they were, and have finances not be the key issue to that school choice issue. And so that area was one where there was a cohesive strategy. And why was that? Well, it was because Jeb Bush, Patricia Levesque, they started this group called the Foundation for Florida's Future. And they were an outside organization that no matter what, over the last 20 years, they were pushing the ball to get universal school choice. And frankly, this year was the first year where the legislature truly adopted that. But every year we made progress towards that. But in all of these other areas, insurance, housing, and criminal justice reform, there wasn't a voice on the outside that was able to kind of guide the state. And that's where I thought the Florida Policy Project would play a role.
Okay, quite a bit there, and I certainly appreciate everything you've said. And I want to say to my co-hosts and to our listening audience, there's just so much that we can say about former Senator Brandeis. So much, but we're going to focus on, for the purposes of this podcast, his work with the insurance crisis, because I know that he worked hard to try and get some resolution for all of his neighbors and others that were complaining, loudly complaining about the insurance crisis. So I have a list of questions that I had written up, but I think I'm going to change my structure here. And I'm going to use an article that I read, and the article has a title. And the title is in the form of a question, and I'm going to use that question to ask our guests to respond. And here's the question. Why is homeowners insurance in Florida such a disaster?
Well, that's a great question. And it has a great answer. I mean, it's a combination answer. It's an answer that includes the simple fact that one, we're the most hurricane-prone state in the country. Two, we're arguably the most litigious state in the country. Three, we had a legislature that was asleep at the wheel and frankly chose not to act when they knew there was a problem. They chose not to act. And we had some court cases that made it kind of created this supernova effect of this combination of hurricanes, litigation, and bad law, and a legislature that frankly didn't want to address the problem that created this issue. Where there's nothing we're going to do to stop hurricanes, right? That's just an act of God, and we've got to accept that there's going to be hurricanes in Florida every few years. But you can't be the most hurricane-prone state and the most litigious state and expect low property insurance rates. And then you can't add to this world of assignment of what they call assignment of benefits, where people would knock on your door and say, hey, listen, we can get your house roof fixed for you. Just sign here on the dotted line and we'll take care of everything. And have some contractor go off and sue your insurance company. Oftentimes the homeowner didn't even know about it. And so Florida, a couple of years ago, we were 8% of total US property claims. So 8% of all the claims filed in the country were filed in Florida, but we were 80% of the national litigation. And so we had even our Citizens Property Insurance. So the Citizens Property Insurance is the insurer of last resort in the state of Florida. They were getting sued 900 times a month. A month. Now, I don't know if you've ever been sued one time in your life, but I can't imagine being sued 900 times a month and what that takes out of it. We were going to spend $100 million a year just in litigation defense costs, just in defense costs. So it got out of control, and the legislature was asleep and didn't fix it, even though they knew it was a problem. They chose not to act on that. And so it was it was a little bit of malpractice by the legislature. Attorneys who just took advantage of the situation, and contractors, there was kind of in cahoots together that took advantage of the contractor. But listen, there's a reason when you walk outside of Florida, you see two things. You see the sun and you see a billboard representing a trial attorney.
That's true.
Right? Like, I mean, those things aren't free. And that was what was really driving the problem. And so these insurance companies were losing money, and 12 of them have left the state in the last 3 or 4 years. Many of them went bankrupt. Their investors got nothing. And the insurance industry as a whole in Florida lost $1 billion each year for the last 5 years. So, who wants to invest in a property insurance company? You can go in there and lose money. No, I'd rather just, put my money in the bank and have it make a little bit of money versus guaranteeing it was going to lose money, which is where it's been in the last 5 years in Florida, in the property insurance world. So the market got harder, got more restrictive. and prices went through the roof. I mean, it wasn't uncommon to see rates go up 30, 40, 50% a year for the last 2 or 3 years. Well, that's not sustainable. And there's a reason Citizens Property Insurance, which is the essentially government-backed property insurer, when Governor DeSantis first got elected, it had about 500,000 policies in it. Today, it has 1.5 million policies in it. It's one of the largest insurers, not in just Florida, in the nation. And it doesn't have a lot of cash to back up those policies. That's the other big problem, right? It's only sitting on, $8-10 billion of cash, which sounds like a lot of money until you realize you're insuring $400-500 billion worth of risk. And one big storm could wipe out every dollar they have and have them come to you and me and pick our pockets for our money so that they can insure these individuals. So it's a big challenge.
Everything he said. Sorry. So he certainly addressed the question. So let's get a little deeper into the questions. You have a question, Jay?
Yeah, so I know you say they've been soft on addressing it, but is there now, knowing the changes and knowing what's going on?
Yeah, there's been some urgency, right? And what happened was, listen, the trial bar was backing up the Brinks truck and saying, listen, we'll give you every dollar we have and we're going to ask you, legislator, to do one thing, which is nothing. Right. Well, what's the easiest thing in the world for a legislator to do? It's nothing. Right? Nothing. So what happened? They did nothing for 3-4 years. In that meantime, they're making billions of dollars in as trial attorneys and contractors, because they had this combination of bad law and this assignment of benefits provision. And then you had Hurricane Irma come through, and Hurricane Irma went up through the spine of the state of Florida, right? It was like virtually every county got affected in the state. Well, that was a litigation bonanza. I mean, that was like finding the largest gold mine for the trial bar that they could have found. And it was millions and billions of dollars. And if you talk to these insurance companies, it wasn't like it was one storm. It was like it was one storm every year for 3 or 4 years. In fact, we still have litigation going on for Hurricane Irma that was going on. Now, I'm not saying all great insurance companies are bad actors, are good actors too. I mean, there are bad actors in every business. What I'm also saying is the entire industry got hit, and the entire industry suffered, and not every company in the industry is bad. And so you can see Citizens has no profit motive. If it makes money, great, but it doesn't distribute out to its shareholders.
Right.
And they got walloped, but 900 lawsuits a month. We had companies in Florida getting sued more in one company than we had the entire state of California filing lawsuits.
Wow.
Like, so I mean, it was out of control. Yeah. And so finally the legislature got to a point in December where it had to act. It didn't have a choice. They had to do something, or you were going to lose the entire industry. And basically, listen, if you can't get insurance on your home, it's the Achilles heel of the state of Florida, right? Yeah. You can't buy or sell a house.
Yeah.
And that's that. You want to talk about shutting down the economy of the state? I mean, we're a tourism driven house. We're a growth state. Right. If you can't buy or sell here, we're kind of getting there now. Then you have real problems. We're already starting to see property development being shut down. Rents are rising because apartment complex, like a policy on an apartment complex has gone up from $500 a door to like $2,000 a door. I mean, you have people paying 1 month's rent just to cover their insurance costs for these apartments, right? It's out of control.
Is that why I'm getting a letter from Citizen now?
Yeah. Yeah. Saying rates are going up.
Yeah.
Right. And and some of your policies are getting taken out. Right. Citizens have to find a way to shrink, but that's one of the reasons. So the legislature changed the law and says, listen, rates have to be more competitive. Understand today, across the state, Citizens is about 33% cheaper than the private market is. But in Tampa Bay and in Miami-Dade, it's about 50% cheaper. So if you want to just get up to market and you're 50% below market, that means you have to raise rates 100%. Now think about how politically unpopular that is, right? If somebody's paying $2,000 today and to get them to market rate, you got to raise their rates to $4,000. Like that is wailing and gnashing of teeth because people feel like, listen, I'm buying the same product I bought last year. It's just costing me twice as much, which is, inflation. Yeah. And that is just, and that's a variety of things are causing that. But part of it's just, insurance looks backwards as much as it looks forwards. And and when it looks backwards, it sees losses every year for the last 5 years.
How about sharing with Senator Brandish what you told me earlier, what your insurance was last year versus this year?
I was insured with Save Point, And it was a funny thing. I got a letter one day and I just opened it up from 3,000 to 13.
Yeah.
I'm telling here that I'm looking at it as a typographical error.
Right, yeah, as you should, like, I mean, who wouldn't look at that as a topographical error?
And I called them and they told me that's what it is. And the answer was, see your agent.
Right,
So can the government what can the government do to help out citizens? Is there anything they can do to?
well, citizens property insurance or citizens, you and I as the people, as the citizens of the state of Florida, right?
I'm sorry, the property insurance
The company,
the
the company.
itself.
Well, look, I mean, they've got to reduce the size of citizens, right? And that unfortunately, that means rates are have to go up for citizen policyholders,
Yeah.
which is terrible, right? Like you don't want to see that happen, but like they don't have another choice, right? If you want to have a private market here in Florida, then you're going to have to do something with citizens prices, and citizens prices have to go up. Now, politically, that's not a very popular thing to say, but that's just economic reality. You're never going to have a private market if the government's providing the same service for half the cost, and you expect a private market to flourish in the state. You can't have it both ways. So, but this is the problem, because you didn't deal with this thing early. It festered into this boil that it is today, and there ain't no easy way to play with. You can either pay me now or you can pay me later, and now we're paying later. Because nobody wanted to pay up front. And had they addressed it up front, they would have solved a lot of this stuff.
A lot of the same things he's talking about now were in evidence during Charlie Chris's term of office. So we're talking 2005, 2006, 7, that time period. This article points out that Charlie Chris was over in Israel and he was at the wall. And he wrote a message on the wall asking God for help to save his state from hurricanes. And
it worked for 5 years. And then it did.
It worked for 5 years. But I want to ask you this question. Let's go to the consumer side of the issue.
Sure.
In the sense of the ones that have paid their premiums, they've gotten the damage from the hurricane, but the insurance companies are not paying the claims.
Yeah.
What are they to do there?
Well, up until last year, we had what we call one-way attorney's fee statute in Florida. Then this was some people would say, oh, it's a great benefit, but it ultimately became a major problem. And that said, if you got paid $1 more than what your insurance company offered you, if you sued them, and you went to court for that, you got all your attorney's fees paid for by your property insurance company. It sounds like a great deal. And it was a great deal in Florida until it got weaponized. Because it got weaponized, what happened is, well, what's the incentive? The incentive is for attorneys to go out, hire and sign up as many people as they can, knowing, hey, if 40% of them get paid out, well, then we're in the money. And so that's what ended up happening. And that's what led to this overwhelming litigation, right? I mean, listen, you want to go sue me, that's fine, but you're going to pay your lawsuit, you're going to pay your legal bills, and I'm going to pay my legal bills in that situation. And part of that keeps us, finding other ways to negotiate this, because you don't want to pay legal fees and I don't want to pay legal fees, right? But if that isn't the case, if you said, hey, listen, you can just, if I win, you're going to pay all my legal fees, it's a pretty strong incentive for you to sue me. And that's the way it was in Florida. Now, it wasn't that way in the rest of the country, and that's why they didn't see their rates go to where Florida's rates went. But that's one thing that changed. But I think there are bad actors in every industry, and that's where you got to focus in on the bad actors and ensure that the good actors can continue to do business without penalizing them more. But what we know of was we had fraud in these companies all over the place, as far as some of the claims that were coming in, and because there was so much of it, they weren't addressing it. Florida was rampant with fraud because there was so much of it. It was like, trying to stomp out the cockroaches in a house, right? You're not going to stomp them out, right? They're going to keep coming back. You got to fumigate that place. And Florida never fumigated. It just tried to keep, you just try to keep going and stomping them out. And that didn't work, right? And that's what happened. And so we've got to deal with the situation that we find ourselves in today, and that's going to take years to get out of the situation.
Well, let me ask you this too, because here's what I look at. You got a problem, and you kept saying they keep stomping it out. To me, that's what they wanted to do. You know, if you know you got this problem and you know that you got to fumigate it, why do we keep stomping it out?
Well, because trial bar kept coming to the state and saying, listen, hey, well, here's some campaign money.
Yeah,
We,
There it
we,
is.
here's what we'd like you to do. Nothing.
yeah, yeah,
Don't
yeah.
don't worry about those.
There it
The
is.
cockroaches only come out at night, so don't worry.
Yeah.
So don't
yeah,
worry about them. You won't see them during the day, right? But that's what happened.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
philosophy.
True.
And listen, the legislature only meets 60 days out of every year.
Yeah.
So you just say, hey, we're not going to do anything for this 60 days. We'll deal with it next year. And then you deal with it next year. Listen, if the legislature on this issue was a football team, it would have been a football team of punters because all they ever did was punt the ball, right? They didn't want to play. And so ultimately, listen, it got to a point where they were backed up. They had to play. They finally did some things, and it's going to take 2 years for that to be seen in the marketplace. And so listen, it's there's no easy way to say it, but we're in for a rough slog here over the next 2 years. And rates are probably going to go up another 5, 10, 15% next year. And then I think they start stabilizing in 2025. And hopefully we get some new companies that are willing to come in here into the state and write business. But if that doesn't happen, listen, Florida's going to have to find a way out of this mess. And it's where it's going to take leadership, and it's going to take some tough decisions, and it's going to take some hard votes by
There it
legislators to
is.
get there.
There it is. There it is. That's what I wanted to say. There it is. Go take leadership.
I want to ask you, first, I mentioned earlier how we applaud your efforts to get that special session going to address the issue. But out of that particular special session, I think you named about 3 things that came out. You talked about the benefits, the assignment of benefits issue came out of the special session.
Yeah.
Where that couldn't be.
They couldn't do no more assignment of benefits. They got rid of the one-way attorney's fees, and then there was a couple other provisions in that special session.
Do you feel like those things are going to be effective enough?
They were. So they had 2 special sessions in 2022. The first one was in May. And in that one, they did not do nearly enough. I think I said that the patient has stage 4 cancer and you're treating the flu. Right. And that's what was happening. They were treating the flu. They weren't fixing the real problem. Right. Now, then they got to December, realizing they treated the flu and the patient kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker. They had to take him in and do surgery. And that's what they did. December was major surgery. Right. And we should think of it like that. It was major surgery done on the patient of the Florida property insurance market.
Decent.
And the problem is it's going to take some time in recovery. And that patient still ain't doing great. It is still struggling. But we got to get this patient off the gurney and start walking again. And I think he starts walking, probably towards the middle of the end of 2024. And, it's going to take a few years before he's running again. And that's therein lies the challenge, right? You can't leave this cancer to fester. And that's what the legislature did for years. There were some of us that stood up and said, listen, you got a real problem here, and this is not going to get better for you. But they chose not to do anything.
Look at now.
Is the governor on board with I know he signed into law.
Yeah.
2 or 3 of the bills that were passed in the special session.
Look, I mean, I think the governor, listen, I think the governor would have signed anything the legislature put before him. I think the
Exactly.
governor could have done a lot more
Yes.
to pressure the legislature to get stuff done. Listen, I mean, what piece of legislation that the governor really wanted didn't get passed in the last 3 years? I mean, you could probably count it on one hand. It'd probably be like 2 things. But if the governor had really leaned in hard on property insurance, we would have seen more get done on property insurance. But the House and I can't put all the blame on the governor. The House and Senate didn't basically, they basically committed malpractice by not taking these issues up and treating them seriously. And the work that they did do was not nearly enough, right? If you got stage 4 cancer, your doctor starting treating you for the flu. I mean, you're not going to say they're a good doctor. You're not going to say that they're doing their duty. They're committing malpractice on you.
Definitely doing nothing.
Well, I tell you what, Jeff, Senator, I really appreciate all the efforts that you put forth to try and get.
Yeah, that is appreciated.
Because it's a sad situation when you got some people losing their homes because they can't pay the insurance.
Absolutely. You got people
losing their homes, and when the people lose their homes, eventually property values are gonna go down. Because they're losing the homes through foreclosures. And anytime you got a lot of foreclosures, you're gonna have quite a bit of
Yeah.
depreciation in the property.
And therein lies the problem. It isn't just homeowners, it's renters, it's business owners, it's everybody along the way. And therein is the biggest sin the legislature has created, it has really done in the last few years, is allow this to go on as long as it did and not address it early, because it affects every single person in the state of Florida, rich or poor. It affects everybody along the way, and it hurts the spending capability of a vast majority of the people of the state of Florida. And it's just not the right thing to do. And the benefit, who did it benefit? It benefited a very few contractors and a very few amount of lawyers.
You know that what this really remind me of? If you take the word insurance out, September the 30th, there's going to be government shutdown. That's what this remind me of. The same thing, the same principles.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, same principles.
Yeah, look, you got a lot of tough things at the federal level. Here's
Yeah.
the state of Florida had one thing to do, which is get the property insurance right. It
Yeah.
isn't that hard,
See,
right? And it hurt us bad. And the problem is, listen, they want to turn the government back on. They can do that in 24 hours. You want to fix the property insurance world, it's going to take you 2 years.
Right. It's gonna hurt tourism too, because you gotta raise prices.
Right, raise prices for hotels, everything, right? It hurts everything along the way.
Yeah.
Well, we've had a pretty good discussion on property insurance, and I know this is only a 30-minute show, which means that we have 4 minutes left. And I want to bring into the discussion a new subject matter.
Sure.
Very important. I think I read where you were made aware of a prisoner who was put into a shower of
Mhm.
scalding water.
Mhm.
And the water was so hot, it peeled his skin
damn.
off.
Mhm.
Can I read that somewhere?
Yeah, that's why I got involved in
And
criminal
that's why
justice
you
reform.
got
That's
involved.
right.
You
That's
got
right.
to be
Good.
kidding.
No,
This
this
is a
inmate-
man principle.
Inmate in Miami-Dade got thrown into a shower. He would acted out in a cell. The corrections officers threw him in the shower, turned the shower all the way up, and left him there for hours. And this, I mean, and you can imagine when these showers are out there, they're not enclosed. They're in the same kind of block as everybody else. So here he is screaming in agony. All of the other inmates have to hear this. They come back and check him, and he had passed away in the shower, but his skin was literally coming off him, and nobody was ever charged for that crime. Those corrections officers are still doing something else today, but they're not behind bars. And that's why I started getting involved in the criminal justice system. That's why I started touring prisons. And that's why I've probably toured more corrections facilities in the state of Florida than almost any other legislator. And that's why I'm passionate about criminal justice and prison reform.
Let's go on that.
When you start hearing about 85% of Florida's prisons are not air conditioned, when you go to most of our prisons and you realize that there are 1,500 inmates at most prisons and there are 0 education opportunities, that 60 to 70% of your inmates can't read at the 6th grade level. And the two defining factors when somebody gets out of prison and they want to kind of re-enter society, and you want to know how successful they're going to be. The first factor is what kind of home they going back to, and the second one is, can they get a job? And if you can't read, really hard to get a job. And so Florida has basically doesn't have a Department of Corrections. It has a Department of Warehousing, where we just warehouse people and we let them get older, and we don't put the resources there to fix some of the problems. But a lot of these people coming in the prison system, they come in with a lot of trauma. They've had really troubled childhoods, and they committed crimes. And it's an opportunity for the state to interact in a positive fashion in their life. And what they get today is not positive. It's largely negative. Most of the prisons in Florida are basically run at a skeleton crew level. We lose 40% of our corrections officers within the first year. 60% of our corrections officers will leave within 2 years. So we have constant turnover. It's hot. It's miserable. Listen, anybody who's been there can tell you there isn't resources in the prison system to help out. And so part of what the Florida Policy Project is looking to do is to change that. And I'll tell you, listen, property insurance I can fix with 3 people. The prison system is going to take a lot longer. It's the hardest area of public policy to work on. It's a real challenging issue, recognize this. I think Pontius Pilate gave more grace than the Governor DeSantis has given in his last 6 years. Because he has not, they haven't pardoned anybody. Right. And therein lies the problem here.
Well, there's so much I want to talk to this man
I know.
about,
There's
so much.
Your wealth of information.
we're at the point that I hate, and that's the point of time being over. I was alerted that we need to cut it out, cut it short. So with that being said, I want to thank our guests, former Senator Jeff Brandes. Thanks for the information you provided us. And at some point, I want you to come back and talk about your new project in detail. I want to thank my two co-hosts. Lovely discussion. As always, really appreciate it. I want to thank our audience for tuning in to 99.1 FM The Bird each and every Tuesday evening, 5:30 p.m. And we also ask that you go to YouTube and type in the Ray Tampa podcast, and you can see them all. So with all that being said, sponsorships are welcome. Good evening.